Good morning, everyone. We're going to give a couple of seconds for people to join us, and then we'll jump right in with our advocacy workshop this morning. And thank you all for joining us. Good morning. On behalf of the Missouri Public Transit Association, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Transit Advocacy Workshop. This year in Missouri, as many of you know, has been a roller coaster for transit. We have seen some significant highs, and then we have also seen some lows, part of why we are here this morning. This year, Missouri state investment for transit took a 42% hit as part of the governor's $300 million cuts on June 30th. Our state investment dropped from 11.7 million to 6.7 million in transit support for 30 providers across the state. This included 1.7 million in state transportation funds with an additional 5 million from general revenue. This funding in Missouri provides that critical non-federal or local match required to enable transit providers across the state to draw down some of the 91 billion in federal funds earmarked for transit as a part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We're in the final year of this federal funding bill. Right now, federal support requires a 50-50 match for transit operations and an 80-20 match for capital programming, making state investment so important. In addition, the MPTA released the results of the 2025 Transit Needs Assessment Study this year. While investment has declined, the unmet demand in this state for transit is up by more than 55%, while at the same time, costs are escalating and more than double that percentage at 119%. So, as advocates, what role can we play? What can we do? Today, we have with us experts on transit advocacy as well as information about the Missouri Legislature. Our goal today is to build our capacity for transit advocacy, better telling our story and knowing the critical context we need to make this session to hopefully move the needle on transit investment. So let's welcome our panel this morning. We have with us Scott Bogren, Executive Director of CTAA, and he's going to be talking about telling your transit story, the how and the why. Welcome, Scott. We have with us Mike Winter with Scherr Winter LLC. He is our lobbyist for the Missouri Public Transit Association, and he's going to be giving us some key information about what to expect in 2026. We also have with us Jay Hardenbrook, the Associate State Director for Advocacy for AARP Missouri, and he's going to talk a little bit about what Missouri advocacy looks like. So welcome to all of our panelists this morning. As we get underway, please leave any questions you may have in the chat box or the Q&A tab, and we will get to them as quickly as possible. So let's start with Scott. Scott has decades of experience with telling this transit story. Right before we started, he said he could do this with blind. So we are so glad to have you with us, Scott. We're hoping to learn this morning some really critical elements for each of us to tell our transit story successfully. So welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, this is a topic I'm passionate about because it's important. I started out at CTAA in the late 1980s writing about transit agencies. Dorothy Yeager would remember one of the first places I visited was out in Oates and learned a lot about the way rural on-demand mobility at the time worked through that. And I knew from the beginning that these were important stories to tell and that there were life-changing work going on in public transit. That's really the piece I want to convey today in terms of the why. When folks come to DC and meet with members of Congress, we have our Hill Day, and we typically do. I think this year we're slated to probably do between 150 and 200 Hill visits in a single day with CTA members. But I always tell folks, I know you're nervous. Smaller transit agencies, the ones that CTA works with, these aren't folks that want to be politicians. None of you probably want to be lobbyists. Thank goodness we got enough of those. But when you're telling your story, You're not doing those things. What you're doing is you're making sure that your community and the passengers are being heard. And it's so important because those folks are the unheard elements in American society. And so I always tell folks, put that passenger that you know so needs your service, put them on your shoulder and carry them with you when you go to the hill. And for this piece in the how or in the why piece of this, I want to focus on the fact that um, if you don't tell this story, you're giving people an out. I never heard from transit is the first reason legislators at the local, state, and federal level don't vote for transit, don't understand transit. I didn't hear from them. You talk to everybody. You try to establish common ground with every elected official that you meet with at all of those levels. And you're not there to say, vote yes, vote no. You're there to say, here's what transit does in the community. Here's why it's important. Here's our value. Here's our relevance. You've got to hit those issues. Uh, uh, I don't need to, you all probably feel this. There's a lot of disconnectedness to political life. And there's a lot of things that happen that we all perceive are out of our control because they are. I don't imagine any of you on this call, on this in this webinar today, have a vote in the Missouri State Legislature. If you did, you'd be doing something different right now. You can't control a vote, but you can make sure that those that have the vote understand the ramifications of what they're voting on. And nobody wins all the time in this business. Um, there are very difficult decisions being made by elected officials. They're choosing between things that have significant need and other things that have significant need. And I try to always take the long view in this when we're talking about this why is you establish pieces. And the best thing you can do at the state level, since that seems to be one of the focuses here, is establish working relationships with folks. And I have always used the filter. Somebody told me this a long time ago. I use the bank account theory on working with elected officials, and by that I mean I make just as many deposits as I make withdrawals. If the only time they're ever seeing me is because I'm asking for something, that's going to get old. You've got to make deposits with those state legislators. You've got to be able to establish a working relationship. The best case scenario is they get a constituent that calls about a transportation challenge and they know to talk to you. Once you've established that, then when you arrive and you say, we need more funding so we can get proper equipment to make this service better. We've got, as Kim mentioned, all this unmet demand that we'd like to meet. You can have substantive relationships and discussions about that when you've made deposits. So keep those things in mind. The other, I think, important why is the it's not even a torrent, it's a fire hose of misinformation that is out there in the world today. Um, I began in the communications world prior to the internet, which all of my staff looks at me like I am a walking dinosaur. And there was no social media. So one person in their basement who sees a bus every 4 days and happens to be right where the bus goes online, so the bus is empty, no one cared. Now they do because they're online saying that bus is always empty. Uh, a guy I've worked with for years, Michael Knoll, he's probably done training in Missouri. He used to tell me he used the ditch digger theory. And the ditch digger theory goes like this. You can be the world's best ditch digger, and you can start at 8 in the morning, and you can work the entire day until 5 at night. And for the 10-minute break you take in the middle of that, the cars that go by think you are a lazy bum. It's the same thing with transit. If you allow the people in that 10-minute window to define everything you do, and when you don't do this work, when you don't tell your story, you are ceding that role to uneducated people in your community who are going to define what public transit is when you're the expert and you know what transit is. So those are the people that once a year, once over the last 5 years, they saw one of your vehicles broken down, and their impression is transit's always it's unsafe. So telling your story fills that void, and it is your job as a leader, whether you're a communications person or you're on other layers within your organization. It is your job. We were all talking about Jay earlier with the AARP logo. And Kim noted the AARP people always have the logo around. There's pride in that. There's pride in that. And there's pride in the fact that they are speaking for an important constituency in Missouri and throughout the country, and they're not afraid of it. You need to have that same mentality. All right. Some of the hows, is most of all for transit agencies, particularly smaller transit agencies, it's finding the time. I know how busy you are. And I know just making pull out in the morning is an achievement, and all the other directions you're being pulled. I often in these kind of sessions say to folks, dedicate an hour a week where you're not going to schedule meetings, where you can think, where if you have an office door, you can close that door and you can strategize how you're best telling transit story. And and the best ways and the most effective ways to do that begins with something that none of us are very good at anymore, listening and paying attention to what elected officials are saying. Never meet with an elected official at any level if you haven't gone to their website and seen their most recent press releases. Okay. Uh, 99 times out of 100, you'll be able to find something that the elected official, she or he, is interested in that connects to transit, healthcare, veteran services, environmental issues. You will be able to connect what you do, the economy, to all of these things. The best meetings happen when you can tag something you're doing directly with what that elected official wants. When you make that connection, that's that deposit we were talking about earlier. They feel heard. Oh, this person has come in and I'm meeting with them, and and they're actually paying attention to what I'm doing. And that can, you don't want to be going into a conservative Republican's office talking about expensive social services. And the same metric, you don't want to be going in to talk to a Democrat who's really interested in environmental issues and not talk about the environment stuff. You just got so like if you think you can craft a message and then just blast it out to everyone, you can't. You got, it's that what's that cliche? Horses for courses. You got to have the right message for the elected. You've got to do your homework. Use that hour to do that. What does this look like? Typically, one page. Okay. If you're going to put it on paper, it's got to be on a page. And I want you to be able to talk about not just about, well, we did this many trips last week, last month, last year. Where were they? What did they do? What did the passengers do when they left the bus? There's the value. It's not just in the consumption of transit, it's what transit creates. And you know that you're serving hospitals and dialysis patients. You know you're keeping hundreds, if not thousands, of senior citizens across the state of Missouri in their homes and independent because you're taking them to the grocery store. and you're taking them to their medical appointments, and they're not having to be prematurely institutionalized. There's value in all those things. That's how you talk about transit. Safety. How many of you have drivers that have gone 1 million miles without an accident? You need to tell them these things. They don't understand the commitment through the regulations and all the other things you do to provide safe transportation to often very vulnerable populations. And and these are the times to take those things on that one pager and speak that stuff. So the best one pagers I see are combinations of excellent data points and some human interest stories that speak to what does this look like for people, their voters, their constituents? What is the impact? And it shouldn't always just be passengers. What are the businesses that are thriving because you're taking customers? How about the adult child of a senior who can work because they don't have to take their mom to dialysis 3 times a week anymore? You're doing that for them. Uh, there's lots of ways to look at that. Use that hour to strategize. CTAs here, we're happy to work with you on those things, but I just want you to focus on set aside an hour, Fridays, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, no meetings. Come up with some goals for how you want to tell your story. Come up with the vehicles, whether they're one pagers, whether they're videos, whether they are public service announcements. Share those with all your colleagues around the state. See what's working, and then use those to develop working relationships with your elected officials. We're here to help. MPTA is there to help. They do a really great job. Kim's, knows this stuff very well. But you got to do it, and you got to commit time to doing it. And I know it seems daunting, but the what you'll recoup from that hour is going to be so valuable to you, and you have a lot of people around you to help you with that. And I'll turn it back to Kim. But anything we can help at CTAA, while others are speaking, I'll drop my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. If you want a second set of eyes on what you're putting together, we're happy to do that for you. Lastly, March 4th through the 6th is our Hill Day in DC. Now that you feel so motivated to do all this, I hope I'll see some of you come to DC, and we'll do similarly to help you do that at the federal level. Thanks, Kim. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And Scott pretty much just teed us up. I'm going to ask Travis to place in the chat box. We have created a one-page form for you to help you tell your story. So it'll be a format that's very easy. You can fill it in. You can bring it when we do visits in the 2026 legislative session in Missouri or on the Hill or with your local elected officials. So I'm going to have Travis put in the chat box a link to both that form as well as our Faces of Transit that you can is a leave behind as well. So thank you, Scott, for all your knowledge on that. So now we're going to turn to Mike Winter with Scherr Winter and MPTA's lobbyist. Mike has decades of experience in Jefferson City. Welcome, Mike, and we look forward to hearing the state of Missouri moving into 2026.
Well, thanks, Kim. And just to piggyback on a little bit of what Scott said, we know that asking you all to probably make Hill visits or come to Jefferson City is something you may not have ever done before. And, part of our job is to make you get comfortable with some of those visits and meetings that we're asking you to have on behalf of public transit. So I'll just make the offer at the beginning. If you are going to be coming to Jeff City, Kim can supply you with my contact information, and we're more than happy to bring you up to speed on the issues that are pertinent when you're making your visits to Jeff City, because things do change fairly frequently. You may think we're going to be working on one thing and then we pivot to another, but we can try to make this experience a little bit better for you if there are any hesitations about making the trip. So let me recap probably 2025 because what happened toward the end of the 2025 legislative session and veto session will probably have some spillover into what we're going to see in 2026. We have, for the last few years, been successful in getting some additional general revenue for state transit assistance, and had some good support in both primarily Senate committee members on the appropriation side who were very supportive of increasing our funding or trying to maintain it at 10 million. We were able to do that again this session, but unfortunately, as Kim noted, when it came time for the veto pen of the governor to be used, he vetoed out $5 million from the general revenue. So we're back to half of what we had for the last 2 or 3 years. Part of our job is to try to restore that funding. And as we look at the session, we always keep track of what MoDOT asked for in their budget requests. And unfortunately, their budget request was $5 million. And so we are going to be asking for additional funding above even the departmental request for next session. And that is a little bit of a higher hurdle to try to clear. But when we started on this path a number of years ago, we did not have a significant budget request in. So we will be pushing, obviously, for the additional funding as we move forward. Also, last session, which will play into it, we deal with concealed carry on public transit, and that issue will be coming back. We've been able to defeat it now for a number of years with the help of a lot of our allies, primarily in the urban areas, who have been supportive about not wanting guns on buses and trains. So that is an issue that we will continue to see. As the veto session came to a conclusion in September, there was a procedural move done which halted the debate on 2 issues dealing with items that we typically don't engage in. One is congressional redistricting, and the other was initiative petition reform. By using the previous question motion in the Senate, it halted all debate. And we know that there was going to be an extended filibuster on both of those items. And by doing that, you really went against the precedent in the Senate and brought things to a conclusion, which quite honestly have left some hard feelings among those who were unable to continue their filibuster and make sure that their opinions were heard before bills moved forward. So I think most of us, and Jay will probably hit on this as well, feel that there will be some residual and holdover into the 2026 legislative session. But we won't know how that plays out until they actually come in early January. Let me talk about some of the things that I think the political outlook for 2026. As many of you know, all of the House of Representatives will be up for re-election, half of the Senate. So we've got term limited members moving out of both chambers. We don't have statewide elections of any significance. Those were all held in 2024. So from that perspective, the focus is always on the House and Senate election cycle. The efforts that we have tried to undertake over the summer with Kim's leadership has been to focus on the most pertinent committees that we deal with, in particular on the funding piece of things. So we have tried to target MPTA members' efforts with particular House and Senate members to get those contacts made in district, and to also build on the relationships that you all already have with your elected officials. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to have some of those meetings over the summer and fall, and those will pay dividends as we get into the legislative session, because regardless of of the efforts that I have in Jefferson City on your behalf, or Jay on behalf of AARP and transit items, what really moves members are the personal contacts that they have with you or riders in their particular districts. So I don't think we can understate the value of those personal contacts. And even if it's just a call, they understand when they start to get calls from constituents that it takes it up a notch. I think when they start to recognize uh, issues in Jefferson City. And if you don't have your elected officials' office numbers or cell numbers, I would try to get those, because that's going to be imperative that you have those when we start session in January. The legislative year effectively kicks off on December 1st for those of us in Jeff City. That's the date that members can start to pre-file legislation. And we saw the highest number of pre-filed bills in recent histories on Monday. So when I was looking at bills that had been filed through yesterday, we already have over 1,100 bills filed in the House and Senate through Wednesday. And to give you an idea of the total volume that we typically see, it's somewhere 1,800 to 2,000, maybe on a really busy year. You'll get a little bit above that. But election years tend to push members to file more bills, especially if they're running for reelection. So the process that we go through here is to review the bills and then flag those of interest for MPTA from the public transit side. And then we provide those to the members so you all have a better idea of the issues that are going to be active in 2026. So we've already seen the concealed carry bills filed in House and Senate chambers. So no surprise there. We anticipate those. And if you didn't see them in an election year, you'd really kind of wonder, it's like, well, what's going on? Because everybody wants to have a Second Amendment position, usually during an election year. The appropriation bills, which we'll be active on, will not be filed until after they go into session. They are really not filed until the governor releases his State of the State message, which coincides with the release of his proposal for the state's operating budget. So I would urge you to stay tuned, because we're going to be calling and asking you to get engaged as things ramp up here in Jefferson City. But again, if there are things that we can do to make it easier for you or make it more comfortable coming to Jefferson City, we're happy to do so and look forward to getting with you when you come to Jeff City. So why don't I stop there, Kim? And
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike said, first of all, kudos to Mike, because he did touch on one of the topics that have been really important to transit in Missouri is CCW on transit. And he has done the yeoman's work over the last 4 or 5 years where those bills have come up each and every year. So we really appreciate your support, Mike. Thank you very much on that. But he will be available, and we will be working to make sure that you feel comfortable on these visits to Jefferson City. And if you can't make it to Jeff City, on any outreach that you're doing. So we'll follow up with that. But now let's turn it over to Jay Hardenbrook, who's the Associate State Director for Advocacy for AARP in Missouri. Jay represents more than 700,000 members and has been successfully advocating on behalf of AARP for some time. And he's going to talk a little bit this morning about what successful Missouri advocacy looks like. So welcome, Jay.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you so much for having me. I'm sure most people are familiar with AARP as an organization, but we are a social change organization for the 50 plus. And we, as Kim said, currently have over 700,000 members in the state of Missouri and over 40 million nationwide. And really what I see my job as the advocacy director, is helping our members advocate for themselves. I am a lobbyist, just like Mike is, and I do spend a lot of time in Jefferson City and in Washington, D.C., but really our goal is to make sure that the issues of our members get met. I'm also very new to this issue, as Kim would no doubt tell you as well, but AARP is not new to this issue. Really, I came around to it when we were working on the master plan on aging for the state. We're one of just a handful of states that are working on these long-term aging plans. And as we were doing the public comment period, we had worked really hard to put all these really great things into it that were going to support people as they aged in the state of Missouri. Every single meeting that we went to, they said, how am I going to get to those services? Where's the transportation that gets me to those things? And it became very clear early on that we were going to have to start talking seriously with the General Assembly about transportation and especially transit in rural and urban areas. I would say on advocacy, one of the things that we've realized is to talk in stories and then add your statistics. Everybody who works on any of these issues has lots of great stories. They're funny, sometimes they're heart-wrenching. But really what they do is they set in someone's mind, especially an elected official, like what is the real core of that issue. And then you can say, there's 300,000 more people like this in the state of Missouri who are facing these same issues, but start with that personal story. So I'm going to sort of like layer on that point with it both Scott and Mike made. But sorry, my cat just knocked something over. Um, one issue that we have worked on for over 20 years in the state of Missouri is the Medicaid cuts that happened in 2005. How do we get back to where people are covered with health care? And so really when we were trying to work this through the General Assembly, obviously we were unsuccessful, but it's a good story anyways. We had one chairman in the House who responded very, very well to statistics. As soon as we laid out, this is what it's going to mean for the budget, this is what it's going to mean for your constituents, he was ready to support it and he was on board. The other chairman in the Senate was very, very opposed to Medicaid expansion and, Obamacare in general. Until he went home to his district one time and he was sitting with, a group of farmers, I'm sure, having their coffee in the morning when the waitress came by and overheard them talking about Medicaid expansion. And she said to him, she'd been, serving him coffee for however many years, I don't have health insurance because I can't afford it. And if you were to expand Medicaid, I would be able to have health insurance and my kids would be able to go to the doctor. It completely 100% changed his view on the issue. He became a huge proponent for expanding Medicaid. We had given him all the statistics, but until he got home and he heard that story from somebody that he knew that lived in his community, it really didn't sink in that this was something that really mattered to the people of the state. So build your message, statistics, stories, bring them together. Scott mentioned people getting nervous. First of all, I'll say these are your neighbors, right? They are the same people that live down your street. They might literally live down the street from you, as people find out whenever we're doing community actions. And don't argue. It sounds so counterintuitive, but I spend so much of my time trying to avoid arguing with elected officials about issues. I will give them the statistics. I will give them my stories. I will answer all of their questions, no matter how angry or confrontational they seem. Just answer the question. Don't worry about how it makes you feel. Just answer their questions to the best of your ability. Keep it positive. Even if they're going negative, keep it as positive as possible. I think both Scott and Mike said this, but talk to everybody. I have so many members. I have one member who literally ran a campaign against one of their elected officials, right? Like, she would seem like the most difficult person to take into a meeting. She even said, I can't talk to that guy. We don't get along. It's going to be awful. I said, just come with me, share your story. They now are great friends. They talk to each other all the time. You can literally count on one finger the number of times that they've agreed on any issue, but she's able to maintain that relationship. She's able to maintain that working relationship, like Scott was talking about. As a person connected in that congressman's district, she can actually assist him in a lot of things, and it makes him more likely to assist also as we go forward. Not going to shock anybody on this call probably, but Missouri is one of the most rural states in the state of Missouri. And because of the way that transit is thought of, Scott touched on this a little bit as well, because they don't think of it as a rural issue. It has been very, very hard to convince all of these rural legislators that they need to invest in something like transit. So especially those rural transportation stories, especially to the two chairmen of the Budget and Appropriations Committees who live in very rural areas, making that argument that this matters to your constituents and here's some stories about why really makes a big difference and can help move some real opinions on the issue going forward. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to all of our panelists today. And I think you're right, Jay. We just actually had some new stats come in about access to healthcare in rural Missouri. You know, in an urban area, on average, you're 7 miles from a healthcare facility. But in rural Missouri, the average is 23 miles plus. And so connecting that to transit and actually telling those stories about healthcare is going to go a long way as well. So thank you for that. Stats and stories is what we're going to call this moving forward. So I'm going to open it up now for questions from our audience. You can place your questions in the chat box. You can place your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those as quickly as possible. So let's start with Mike. Mike, who will be the most important targets with regards to outreach this coming session?
Well, since we've had the funding issue that we've had with the veto of the 5 million, I think we need to have some concentrated efforts on the House Budget Committee, which is, numbers in the mid 30s, but I would assume that everyone on this call probably has someone in their legislative district that they could reach out to. And then also in the House, but to a lesser extent, because the House Budget Committee tends to do all the heavy lifting, we have subcommittees in the House, and there is a transportation subcommittee for appropriations. They do 2 or 3 other budget bills as well. But that is also a good place to start. So if we could get a recommendation coming out of the subcommittee to take to the full committee, then you've actually got some advocates on the full budget committee pushing for increased funding. On the other side of the building, on the Senate, it's the Senate Appropriations Committee. We have a new chair since the end of session, Senator Rusty Black from Northwest Missouri. So Rusty has been on the Senate Appropriations Committee since he's been in the Senate, but he is in the new leadership role as the chair. So he will have the yeoman's work and the bulk of the influence in trying to craft the budget. And one thing I guess Jay and I probably didn't mention, if you keep track of what Missouri's economic outlook is, we've had some really good years with federal money coming in and state coffers being pretty flush. We're coming to the end of that here soon, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about how funding looks moving forward. So those contacts you make are going to become even more key as we look at 2026 and beyond.
Okay, great. And Mike, anything with regards to the governor's office as well?
If anyone has a relationship with Mike Kehoe, I would urge you to take advantage of that relationship with the governor. He is always out and about and appreciates hearing from constituents, and those constituents who happen to be personal friends would obviously carry more weight. But I would not hesitate, even if you don't know the governor personally, but reaching out to his office, urging them to increase transit funding if at all possible.
Great, thank you. So, Scott,
Hey, Kim, could I add to that just really quickly, too? Sorry.
jump right in.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike made a really good point. He is out and about a lot. So if he's in your community, he's very approachable, very much wants to talk to constituents. So yeah, if you can get him in your community, definitely do that.
Great. Thank you, Jay. I'm sorry I cut you off.
And Kim,
So,
I was hoping, Kim, I could follow up on what Jay had to say earlier. I'm sorry. But
no, go for it.
I want to give a real world example of not looking for a fight, but instead looking for a solution. I've sat with members recently. We've gone in to visit with folks about Medicaid policy, and we've been meeting with people who we don't really, who have voted for the big beautiful bill and all these pieces. And and I know the people I'm sitting with don't agree. But the point we made was, okay, this bill is passed, It's going to reduce access in rural areas. You've got work requirements for people that are oftentimes transportation disadvantaged. Public transit in rural America can connect people to further far-flung hospitals. That is going to be very necessary. And we can be a solution to you to help people access work. And that's exactly what Jay was saying. Look for solutions, never look for a fight. I'm sorry, I interrupt. It's Mike's turn to interrupt you now, Kim.
Nope, that's what I'm here for. Pure
Okay.
interruption. So, Scott, piggybacking on that, and you are looking at the federal perspective most of the time, but why do you think that this state investment is critical from your perspective?
Well, I mean, you touched on the fact that it's used to match federal funds. I mean, that's the first and most obvious piece, and it's an important piece to make that a dollar invested by the state of Missouri leverages $4 when you're buying a vehicle. There's I was meeting with state officials in West Virginia over the summer, and that really has a lot of currency with them. Oh, so this investment at the state level really booms and can grow. Um, First off, that there's also, I think, just the idea of state support. I know, as you sought, Kim, to build support, you often pointed to other neighboring states and said, "How come they're investing this much and we're not?" And Missouri is a very rural state. I would imagine, I haven't done the math on this, but I would imagine that and Jay would know, there's certainly a significant aging population that is growing in the state of Missouri. Now you take that aging population and you look at 1 and 2 car households and 0 and 1 car households. All this data is available. And now let's also look at wherever we see aging populations, we see dramatic increases in people reporting they have a disability. That can be as well an issue. If you surveyed, and Jay, and I'm picking on AARP's issues right now, but if you surveyed older adults across the state of Missouri and said, "How do you want to age?" a very high percentage would say, "I want to live in my home." You make that happen. And I think that's the other piece of why state investment can mean so much, because it's often much more tied to demands than at the federal level. The federal level, rural funds for the state of Missouri are 100% purely a function of the census. If Missouri provided 3 times the amount of service that you provide today, you'd get the same amount of federal funds. If you provide no service, dirty little secret, you'd get the same amount of funds. It's all based purely on census data. So it's this combination of this formula that's sending money in the rural piece, in the 5310 piece to the state, with the state stepping up to invest, is where you see transit booming and where you see communities connecting and where you see a lot less unmet demand. There is always good state and local investment backing right up alongside the federal investment. It's a three-legged stool. You take a couple legs off, it doesn't work as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? So I do think it's very important that individuals who have joined us today, that we do need you to tell your story at the federal level as well. The Missouri congressional delegation needs to hear from you about the importance of public transit to Missouri and the need to continue federal support of public transit. But also, if you tell your story to that congressional delegation, maybe there's some trickle down to our state legislators as well. We need them to all be on the same page that it is an important element of the total transportation system in Missouri. And sometimes I don't think that that is percolating in people's minds when we talk to them about public transit. And it's really important that we make that connection, state, federal, and local. So this next question, I think I'll address it to Mike and Jay, but Scott, feel free to jump in at any time. When we're looking at the Missouri legislature, I'm asking you to look into your crystal balls. What do you think will move the needle on this issue this year, if anything? This is the tough one.
Kim, I think there's a number of things that are going to come into play, and how you keep this part of the discussion, I think, will be some of the challenge. When Governor Kehoe was elected, one of his platforms was the elimination of the income tax, and we anticipate seeing a bill dropped by someone on his behalf, probably before the end of the year, surely by early January, which I think it becomes all consuming with that issue to some extent, because you've got to figure out, if we no longer have an income tax to generate revenue, what does it look like, and how can you raise the same amount of revenue by some other method? They're still going to have to work on a budget bill, obviously, but I think some of that is going to overshadow even some of the budget discussions to some extent. So I think it will be a challenge, but it's one that we've got to embrace and try to move forward with. And I like what Scott and Jay have been talking about, using the stories about what you're doing locally and the people you're assisting in their everyday lives. Because as we talk about how rural Missouri is, a lot of those folks, the last thing they want to do is have to leave their home. And, as much as we can piggyback on, we're the way to assist in making sure these people can live in the community they were born and raised in and spent their whole life in, and help them get to whatever they need service-wise with our transit systems. I think that will help break through some of the noise that we need to get through.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Mike on that. I think I would also agree with him from a previous answer he had. It's so important that the budget and appropriations committees are hearing messaging constantly throughout the entire legislative session. Like, for us, whenever we talk about caregivers, we're also going to talk about rural transit. Whenever we talk about healthcare, we're also going to talk about rural transit. Like, we got to make it so vitally important. This is not that much money, in the grand scheme of the budget. This is such a tiny amount of money, and it means so very much to all of the communities that are served by our transit folks. So stick to rural, like we talked about. We got to convince the governor to not line item veto this thing. So I think that the real thing is, while the budget's in the House, like Mike said, we keep the drumbeat up on the members of the budget committee, try to get them to take some action, do the exact same thing in the Senate, and throughout the entire, right up until the budget is signed. We got to keep that drumbeat going into the governor's office too, to make sure that he doesn't cross that out.
Great. Thank you very much for that answer. Scott, did you want to add anything? I don't want to cut you off.
No. I would, again, the chairman of the T&I committee is Sam Graves, a Missourian, and he supports transit. 2 weeks ago, the administration through OMB floated the idea of taking mass transit out of the Highway Trust Fund, which would zero out funding at a dedicated level for all forms of public transit, an existential threat. 2 days later, Congressman Graves said, yeah, we're not going to do that. That would be bad. I'll never get a bill done. But public transit has been part of this program for 40 years, and it needs to continue. So there's an example of how this can work. If he sees that at the federal level, you need to make all of the folks at the state level understand the same piece.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have
I
come
was
to
gonna
our
say,
final.
especially since one of them may be in that congressional seat sometime in the future.
Yep.
There we go. I think we've come to our final question this morning. I don't see anything in the chat box or the cell. Or in the Q&A. I do see that Scott has placed his contact information with CTAA in the chat box, and I just wanted to point that out for anyone who is interested. So, final question for the three of you. And I always like to ask this question when we do these panels because I think it's really critical. If someone leaves this conversation, they need to have one nugget of information that really sticks with them. So, what is your key takeaway from each of you to our audience on what successful advocacy for transit would look like? Or what do you believe that people need to know?
Well, I'll go first, Kim. The things that I come back to, what moves them is the personal contact and the impact that what you do has on their constituent lives. So those are the key things in my mind that I think everyone needs to think of as you're scheduling and having these visits with your elected officials.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
I was just going to say to Scott's point earlier, find out who the constituent relations person is in each one of the offices, who's getting those calls, because that's where you're going to really get the biggest impact, where they're going to call you to ask for help. And those folks matter so much to their legislators because they are the ambassador back to their district. So yeah, find out who at least in the budget offices, find out who the budget person is, right? Get to know them really well and find out who the constituent person is and get to know them really well and share your stories with both of them.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Kim, I'm gonna hit them with a blizzard of cliches here at the very end.
Okay.
Just do it for one. Okay. A lot of you have spent your lives being the best kept secret in town. This is not the time to be that. Some of you have had the strategy of staying low in the foxhole is the safest place. That's not the case anymore. You've got to get out there and make the case and talk about your value.
Great. And we'll use that, even though it may be trademarked, Scott, by
Yeah, I
some
know.
large company,
Yeah,
but we'll
yeah.
go with it. Now, we did have one question come in really quickly before we wrap today. Will there be more changes to the personal property tax, which funds senior tax boards and might have effects on senior transportation, especially in rural areas? Does anyone want to weigh in on that before we wrap today?
I'm happy to talk about it since I get to do tax policy all the time. So I will say that the real push behind elimination of the personal property tax, I think that left with a few termed out legislators. That said, it's always going to be out there. Nobody likes to pay personal property tax. I will admit I don't even pay mine on time. But I think that it's just like it's too big of a lift for the counties. And even the people who continue to support it also admit that the state would have to backfill any dollars that they took away due to the Hancock Amendment, and the state can't afford to do that. So I think it's become kind of a dead issue, but it's going to be very political this year, and I'm sure it's going to come up a lot.
Thank you, Jay, for fielding that. Okay, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Each of you has been a wealth of information, and I really appreciate your expertise this morning. I want to thank everyone who has joined us for this important conversation. We will post this video to our social channels later this morning for anyone who is interested in rewatching or sharing it with your colleagues. In addition, please check out the mopublictransit.org website. We have already scheduled 3 Transit Tuesdays at the state capitol. We would love for you to join us those days to tell your stories and your stats in person to legislators, and hopefully going as a group will take away some of the nervousness you may be feeling. And we also have the Faces of Transit accessible already, which includes stats and stories of individuals in Missouri, as well as employers and stakeholders impacted by public transit. So Please consider joining us. Please mark your calendar for those dates. Please also check out our social channels as we will be talking about the upcoming work in advocacy, so much more. So thank you everyone for your time today. Make it a great day, and we hope to see you in Jefferson City in 2026. Thank you.